The orc servant kept his eyes on the stone floor as another merchant passed through the grand hall, his massive frame bent low in a bow that had become as natural as breathing. Yarrick Kine watched the green-skinned figure from his position near the hearth, noting how the orc's shoulders never quite straightened, how his gaze never lifted higher than the boots of those who passed. For 3 weeks, Yarrick had been staying at the merchant lord's estate while recovering from injuries sustained on the road, and in all that time, he had never once heard the orc servant speak a single word to anyone. The estate belonged to Lord Harvin, a wealthy trader who dealt in spices and silks from the eastern provinces. Yarrick had arrived half dead from blood loss after bandits attacked his caravan, and Harvin's guards had found him along the roadside. The Lord had taken him in out of what Yarrick suspected was equal parts charity and curiosity about the scars that covered Yarrick's body, marks of battles fought in the king's army before he had purchased his discharge and struck out to make his own way in the world. The orc servant moved through the hall carrying an armload of firewood, his movements careful and measured. He was tall even for an orc, perhaps 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against the simple gray tunic he wore. His skin was a deep forest green, and small tusks protruded from his lower jaw. As he passed near Yarrick, he bowed again, this automatic gesture of deference that seemed to define his entire existence. Yarrick found himself troubled by it in a way he could not quite name. He had seen orcs before, of course. He had fought against them in the border wars, had killed more than his share. But he had also seen the peace treaties signed, had watched as orc clans tentatively began trading with human settlements. The war had been over for 5 years now, and yet here was this orc, living as a servant in a human household, silent and subservient to a degree that struck Yarrick as profoundly wrong. "His name is Gruck," said a voice beside him. Yarrick turned to find Lord Harvin's daughter, Mirabelle, a young woman with dark hair and calculating eyes. "Father purchased him from a slaver 4 years ago. He does excellent work and never causes any trouble." "Purchased him," Yarrick repeated, the words leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. Mirabelle shrugged. "The orc clans sell their own sometimes. The weak ones or those who displease their chiefs. It is perfectly legal under the treaty provisions." Yarrick knew this was technically true. The treaties had included clauses about prisoners of war and criminals, provisions that ambitious humans and orcs alike had twisted into justifications for a trade in living beings. He had never participated in it himself, had always found the practice distasteful, but he had not spoken against it either. Now, watching Gruck arrange logs in the massive fireplace with careful precision, never meeting anyone's eyes, he felt shame curling in his gut. "Does he ever speak?" Yarrick asked. "Not that I have heard. Father says he understood commands well enough when he first arrived, but I have never heard him say a word. Perhaps they cut out his tongue before selling him." Mirabelle said this with such casual indifference that Yarrick felt his jaw tighten. Over the following days, Yarrick found himself watching Gruck more closely. The orc moved through the estate like a ghost, appearing to perform tasks, and then vanishing again into the servants' quarters. He bowed to everyone he encountered, from Lord Harvin himself down to the stable boy. He carried loads that would have required 2 strong men, never complained, never rested where others might see him, and he never, ever spoke. Yarrick's injuries were healing well. The sword cut across his ribs had closed cleanly, and the arrow wound in his thigh no longer bled when he walked. Soon he would be well enough to leave, to continue on to the frontier settlement where he had planned to purchase land, and start a new life far from the politics and intrigues of the kingdom's heartland. But he found himself lingering, postponing his departure, and he knew it was because of the silent orc servant. One evening, Yarrick descended to the kitchens late at night, unable to sleep and hoping to find some wine or ale. He found Gruck instead, sitting alone at the long wooden table with a small bundle of cloth before him. The orc's large hands, so capable of lifting and carrying impossible weights, were working with surprising delicacy on what appeared to be embroidery. Gruck looked up as Yarrick entered, and for just a moment their eyes met. The orc's eyes were a startling amber color, bright and intelligent. Then Gruck was rising, bowing, already moving to set aside his work. "Please," Yarrick said quickly, "do not stop on my account. I just came for wine." Gruck remained standing, his head lowered, waiting. Yarrick found the wine himself, poured a cup, and then on impulse poured a second. He set it on the table near where Gruck had been sitting. "Will you sit with me?" Yarrick asked. "I find I am tired of my own company." For a long moment, Gruck did not move. Then, slowly, he sank back onto the bench, but he did not reach for the wine. His hands remained in his lap, and his eyes stayed fixed on the table. Yarrick sat across from him and examined the embroidery Gruck had been working on. It was a small cloth, perhaps meant to be a handkerchief, decorated with an intricate pattern of leaves and flowers. The work was exquisite, each tiny stitch perfect. "This is beautiful," Yarrick said honestly. "Did you teach yourself?" No response. Gruck's massive shoulders were tense, his entire body radiating discomfort. Yarrick tried a different approach. "I am leaving soon, going west to the frontier territories. I hear there is good land to be had, room to build something new, still nothing." But Yarrick thought he saw something flicker in those amber eyes, some spark of interest or perhaps longing. "I fought in the wars," Yarrick continued, speaking more to himself than expecting answers. 5 years in the border campaigns. I killed orcs. I watched friends die at orc hands. When the peace was signed, I thought I would be angry about it, but mostly I just felt tired." He took a drink of wine. "I am tired of fighting, tired of killing. I want to build something instead." Gruck's hands had moved to rest on the table, and Yarrick noticed for the first time the scars that marked them. Old burns, cuts, the puckered marks of shackles worn too tight. These were not the hands of someone who had lived gently. Yarrick wanted to say more, to somehow reach through the wall of silence that Gruck had built around himself. But footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the cook, a stern woman who glared at finding them both in her kitchen. Gruck was on his feet instantly, bowing, gathering up his embroidery with quick, guilty movements. He vanished into the shadows before Yarrick could say anything more. The next morning, Yarrick sought out Lord Harvin in his study. The merchant lord greeted him warmly, pleased that his guest was recovering so well. "I wish to purchase something from you," Yarrick said without preamble. Harvin's eyes lit with mercantile interest. Of course. What can I offer you? Spices for your new homestead. Fine cloth. I have some excellent carpets recently arrived from. I want to buy Gruck." The silence that followed was profound. Harvin's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on cautious curiosity. "The orc servant, whatever for? I need help establishing my farm. He is strong and seems capable. I will pay a fair price." This was not entirely true. Yarrick could hire help easily enough once he reached the frontier. But the thought of leaving Gruck here, silent and bowing, trapped in this half-life of servitude, had become intolerable to him. Harvin stroked his beard thoughtfully. "He is quite valuable. Well-trained, obedient, never causes trouble. I would need at least 50 gold crowns." It was an outrageous sum, more than twice what such a purchase should cost, but Yarrick did not argue. He counted out the coins from his savings, money he had planned to use for lumber and livestock, and placed them on Harvin's desk. The merchant lord drew up papers of transfer, and just like that, Yarrick found himself the legal owner of another human being. The wrongness of it sat in his stomach like a stone, but he told himself it was necessary, a step toward something better. When Gruck was summoned and informed of the transfer, his face remained utterly blank. He bowed to Harvin, then bowed to Yarrick, and gathered his few possessions without a word. If he felt anything about this change in his circumstances, he gave no sign of it. They left the next morning, Yarrick on his horse with Gruck walking beside him. Yarrick had offered to buy a second horse, but Gruck had simply looked at him with those amber eyes and then started walking, his long legs easily keeping pace with the horse's steady gait. For 2 days, they traveled in silence. Yarrick made several attempts at conversation, but Gruck never responded. At night, when they made camp, Gruck worked efficiently to set up their small tent and start a fire, then positioned himself at the edge of the firelight as though waiting for permission to sleep. "Come closer to the fire," Yarrick said on the second night. "It is cold." Gruck moved exactly 2 feet closer, then settled back into watchful stillness. Yarrick felt frustration building in his chest. "I did not buy you to have a slave, you know. When we reach the frontier, you will be free. I will draw up papers of manumission. You can leave, go wherever you wish." For the first time, Gruck's expression shifted. His brow furrowed, and he seemed to be struggling with something internal. His mouth opened, then closed, his hands clenched into fists and released. But still, no words came. "Can you speak?" Yarrick asked gently. "Did they hurt you?" Gruck touched his throat briefly, then shook his head. So he had not been physically prevented from speaking. The silence was a choice, or perhaps something deeper, some wound that went beyond the physical. Yarrick decided not to push further. "Well, when you are ready, if you ever wish to speak, I will listen." They reached the frontier settlement of Millbrook's Rest on the 5th day of travel. It was a small community, perhaps 200 souls, situated on the edge of cultivated lands where the great western forest began. Beyond the forest lay Orc territories, tribal lands that had been recognized as sovereign under the peace treaties. It made this a place of unusual mixing, where Orc traders sometimes came to exchange furs and herbs for human metalwork and grain. Yarrick's land was an hour's walk from the settlement itself, 100 acres of mixed forest and clearings with a small stream running through it. There was an old cabin on the property, small and in need of repair, but solid enough. The previous owner had died with no heirs, and the land had reverted to the settlement council, who were happy to sell it to a veteran with coin in his pocket. Gruck examined the cabin with what Yarrick was learning to recognize as his considering expression, those amber eyes taking in every detail. Then, without waiting for instruction, he began unloading their supplies and sorting them with calm efficiency. Over the next weeks, they fell into a rhythm of work. The cabin needed a new roof, and they spent days cutting and splitting shingles. The small barn was missing half a wall, which they rebuilt with logs hauled from the forest. They cleared land for spring planting, Gruck wielding an axe with devastating effectiveness, his Orc strength allowing him to fell trees that would have taken Yarrick hours of effort. And still, Gruck did not speak. But gradually, Yarrick began to notice small changes. Gruck no longer bowed quite so low or quite so often. When Yarrick said something humorous, he sometimes saw the corners of Gruck's mouth twitch upward. When they sat by the fire at night, Gruck now sat close enough to actually feel the warmth, and sometimes he would take out his embroidery and work on it, those massive hands creating delicate beauty. One morning, Yarrick woke to find fresh rabbit already skinned and prepared for breakfast, and a small bundle beside his bedroll. He unwrapped it to find a handkerchief embroidered with a surprisingly accurate rendering of his horse, every detail of the animal's marking captured in thread. Gruck was outside splitting wood, but when Yarrick emerged and held up the handkerchief with a questioning look, the orc stopped his work. The expression on his face was complex, uncertain, almost hopeful. "This is wonderful," Yarrick said, meaning it absolutely. "Thank you." The smile that crossed Gruck's face then was small but genuine, and it transformed his features entirely. For just a moment, Yarrick saw not a silent servant but a person, an individual with thoughts and feelings and the capacity for joy. Something shifted in Yarrick's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. Spring arrived with a rush of green growth and bird song. Yarrick and Gruck planted their fields, putting in wheat and barley, beans and squash. They acquired chickens from the settlement, and Gruck built them a coop so sturdy and well-designed that neighbors began stopping by to admire it. Word spread that the veteran who had purchased the old Merrick property had an orc helper, and reactions were mixed. Some settlers viewed it with suspicion, but others, particularly those who lived nearest the orc territories and had come to know their neighbors across the forest, saw it as a positive sign. One such neighbor was Elsa Vines, a widow who ran a successful herb farm with her 2 grown sons. She stopped by one morning with a basket of starter plants for a kitchen garden. "Thought you boys might appreciate some variety," she said cheerfully, handing the basket to Yarrick. "And I wanted to meet your friend properly." She turned to Gruck, who had frozen in place like he always did when strangers appeared, and offered him a warm smile. "Hello there, I am Elsa. My land is just over the eastern ridge. You are welcome to visit any time." Gruck bowed, but Elsa waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, none of that now. We are neighbors, not lords and servants." She looked between them both. "There is a gathering in the settlement this Saturday evening. Music and dancing, chance to meet folks. You both should come." After she left, Yarrick found Gruck staring after her with an expression of complete bewilderment. "She is kind," Yarrick said. "There are good people here." Gruck's expression suggested he was not entirely convinced, but that evening he planted the herb starts with careful attention, arranging them in neat rows near the kitchen door. Saturday came, and Yarrick decided they would indeed attend the gathering. He had been so focused on work that he had not socialized much with the broader community, and it seemed important to establish themselves as part of the settlement. Gruck was clearly reluctant, but he followed Yarrick into town as the sun set and lanterns were being lit in the common square. Tables had been set up with food and drink, and a small group of musicians with fiddles and drums were tuning their instruments. Perhaps 50 people had gathered, talking and laughing. The laughter died somewhat when they noticed Gruck. Yarrick felt the orc tense beside him, saw him start to hunch his shoulders in that defensive posture of submission. Without thinking, Yarrick touched Gruck's arm gently. "You have as much right to be here as anyone," he said quietly. Elsa appeared at their side like an angel of mercy. "You made it. Wonderful. Come, you must try the apple cider. Martin Yates makes it and swears by his secret recipe." She linked her arm through Yarrick's and began pulling him toward the tables, chattering about the settlement's inhabitants, pointing out various people and their occupations. Yarrick glanced back to see Gruck following at a short distance, looking deeply uncomfortable but not fleeing. He counted that as progress. The evening was pleasant. The music was lively, and Yarrick found himself talking with other settlers about crops and weather, comparing notes on the challenges of frontier farming. Several people asked about Gruck with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion, but Yarrick deflected the nosier questions and simply said he was a friend and working partner. It was perhaps an hour into the gathering when everything changed. A group of traders had arrived from the eastern provinces, and one of them, a young woman, approached the food tables. She was helping herself to bread when she reached past someone for the butter, and her sleeve rode up her arm. Yarrick was standing perhaps 10 feet away and would not have noticed at all, except that he heard a sound beside him unlike anything he had ever heard from Gruck before. It was a sharp inhalation, almost a gasp, followed by a low sound that might have been a word or might have been just a vocalization of shock. Yarrick turned to see Gruck staring at the young woman with an expression of complete astonishment, his amber eyes wide and fixed on her wrist. The woman felt his stare and turned, her own eyes widening when she saw the large orc looking at her. She was tall for a human woman, perhaps 5.5 feet, with dark skin and close-cropped black hair. Her clothing was travel-worn but of good quality, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to the road. But it was her wrist that Gruck was staring at, Yarrick realized. As she had reached for the butter, her sleeve had pulled back to reveal a scar, distinctive and unmistakable. It was shaped like a small crown, perhaps 2 inches across, the kind of brand that might be made with a specially forged iron. The woman followed Gruck's stare to her own wrist, and her expression shifted through shock into something far more complex. Recognition, and with it, something that might have been fear or might have been hope. She took a step toward them, and Gruck made another sound, strangled and desperate. His hand came up, and he pushed up his own sleeve, revealing his inner forearm. There, in slightly faded green against his darker green skin, was a scar identical to the one on the woman's wrist. A small crown. The gathering had gone quiet around them. Everyone was watching now, sensing something significant though few understood what. The woman spoke, and her voice was shaking. "They told me everyone else was killed. They told me I was the only one who survived." Gruck's mouth was working, his entire body trembling with the effort of something. His hands moved to his throat, pressing against it as though he could physically force out the words that had been locked inside for so long. "Jara," he said, and his voice was hoarse and cracking, the voice of someone who had not used it in years. "Princess Jara." The woman called Jara let out a sob and crossed the distance between them in 3 quick steps. She was not an orc, Yarrick realized with shock. She was human. But Gruck was looking at her like she was his entire world, and when she reached up to touch his face with shaking hands, he bent down to press his forehead against hers in what was clearly an orc gesture of deep affection. "Gruck," she whispered, "I thought you were dead. I thought they killed you all." "I was sold," Gruck said, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. "Betrayed, sold to humans." Yarrick felt like an intruder on something profoundly private, but he could not look away. Around them, the other settlers were whispering, confused and fascinated. Elsa appeared at Yarrick's elbow. "We should give them space," she said gently, and began shooing the curious onlookers back, giving Gruck and this mysterious woman room. But Jara was looking around now, seeming to remember they had an audience. She kept one hand on Gruck's arm as though afraid he might disappear. "Is there somewhere we can talk? Privately?" Yarrick stepped forward. "Our farm is an hour's walk. You are welcome there." Jara looked at him for the first time, truly looked at him, and Yarrick saw a sharp intelligence in her dark eyes assessing him, judging him. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded. "Thank you. I am traveling with a trader company. I will need to inform them I am leaving for the evening." "We will wait," Yarrick said. She squeezed Gruck's arm once more, then hurried off toward where several wagons were parked at the edge of the common. Gruck watched her go, then turned to Yarrick. His face was wet with tears, Yarrick realized, and the orc seemed suddenly exhausted, as though speaking those few words had drained him completely. I do not understand what is happening, Yarrick admitted quietly, but we will figure it out. Gruck nodded, unable or unwilling to say more. Jara returned shortly, carrying a small pack. They will camp here tonight and leave in the morning. I told them I am staying. She looked at Gruck. I am staying. The walk back to the farm was surreal. Gruck and Jara walked close together, not quite touching, both seeming overwhelmed. Yarrick led the way, giving them privacy while his mind raced with questions. Once at the cabin, Yarrick lit the lamps and started a fire while Gruck and Jara sat at the table, still just looking at each other as though unable to believe the other was real. Finally, Yarrick set tea in front of them both and sat down himself. I think, he said gently, that someone needs to explain what is happening. Those scars, the crowns, what are they? Jara wrapped her hands around her teacup. They are royal marks, she said. I was born princess of the Ironroot Orc clan. The crown is branded on all children of the chief's bloodline when they are 5 years old. Yarrick stared at her. You are human. I am adopted, Jara said simply. The chief found me when I was an infant, abandoned at the edge of Orc territory. He and his wife could not have children of their own, so they raised me as their daughter. I grew up Orc in all but body. She looked at Gruck. Gruck was sworn to my service when we were both children. He was my guard, my companion, my dearest friend. What happened? Yarrick asked. Jara's expression went dark. Betrayal. There was a faction in the clan that never accepted me, that believed a human could not be true Ironroot. When I was 15, they staged a coup. They murdered my father, my mother, and as many of their supporters as they could find. I escaped only because Gruck got me out, fought off 5 warriors to give me time to run. She reached across the table to take Gruck's massive hand in both of hers. I thought they had killed you. I heard you screaming and I ran like a coward, and I thought they had killed you. They tried, Gruck said, his voice still rough and uncertain. But the new chief, Corgan, decided selling me was more profitable than killing me. More humiliating too. I was sold to humans as a slave, forbidden to speak on pain of death to my remaining family members. His other hand came up to touch his throat. I stopped speaking, could not seem to start again. Yarrick felt his heart breaking for both of them. How long ago was this? 6 years, Jara said. I have been searching for survivors ever since. I heard rumors of Ironroot Orcs being sold into slavery, but the trails always went cold. She looked at Yarrick. Who are you? How did you come to have Gruck? Yarrick explained simply, not hiding anything. How he had seen Gruck as a servant, how wrong it had seemed, how he had purchased him with the intent to free him. I have the papers of manumission drawn up, he finished. I was waiting for the right time to present them. Gruck has been free to leave whenever he wished. Gruck was staring at him with an expression Yarrick could not quite read. You freed him? Jara asked. Well, I intended to. I suppose I should just do it now. Yarrick rose and went to the small trunk where he kept his important papers. He found the manumission documents and brought them to the table, along with ink and quill. He signed them with a flourish and pushed them across to Gruck. There, you are free. Legally, officially, completely free. Gruck looked down at the papers, at his name written there in the careful legal language that declared him no longer property but a person under the law. His hand trembled as he touched the parchment. Why? He asked, looking up at Yarrick. Why do this? It was a good question, and Yarrick found himself struggling to answer it completely honestly. Because slavery is wrong. Because you deserved better. Because. He trailed off, not sure how to put into words the connection he had felt growing between them, the way he had come to look forward to their quiet evenings, the way Gruck's rare smiles had become precious to him. Jara was watching him with those sharp, assessing eyes again. A small smile played at her lips. I see, she said softly, though Yarrick had no idea what she thought she saw. They talked long into the night. Jara explained how she had survived, working as a translator and guide for traders moving between human and orc territories. She had been searching for any survivors of the coup, but had found none until tonight. She had almost not come to the gathering, had been tired from travel and ready to simply rest in the wagon. Fate, Gruk said quietly. It was fate. As the fire burned low, Yarrick realized they had not discussed the obvious question. What happens now? Will you return to Orc lands? Try to reclaim your position? Jara shook her head firmly. The Ironroot clan is lost to us. Even if we could defeat Korgan, too much time has passed. Those who supported my family are dead or scattered. And honestly, she looked at Gruk, I have no desire to return to that life. I was a princess in name, but I was never truly accepted. I spent my whole childhood proving myself, trying to be orc enough, strong enough, worthy enough. I am tired of it. What do you want? Gruk asked. Jara was quiet for a long moment. Peace. Somewhere I belong, people who accept me as I am. She looked around the cabin at the simple furnishings, the herbs drying from the rafters, the half-finished embroidery on the side table. This looks like peace. Yarrick felt his heart skip. You want to stay here if we would be welcome, Jara said, looking between him and Gruk. I am good with figures, I know trading, I can hunt and track, I could be useful. You are welcome, Yarrick said immediately. Then, feeling he should be clear, but this is Gruk's home as much as mine, he should have equal say. Gruk was looking at him with open surprise. You would do that, make me a partner, not a servant or worker. I thought we already were partners, Yarrick said honestly. The papers I sign make it legal for you to leave, but I had hoped you would choose to stay, as an equal, a friend. He hesitated, then pushed forward. More than a friend if you wanted. The silence that followed was profound. Jara's eyebrows had risen, and a genuine smile was spreading across her face. Gruk was frozen, his amber eyes locked on Yarrick's face. I do not understand, Gruk said carefully. Yarrick felt his face heating, but he had started this and would finish it. I care about you. Not as a servant, not as a worker, as a person, as someone I have come to. He searched for the right word. Admire, deeply. You are human, Gruk said, as though this was an insurmountable obstacle. I know, and you are orc. I know that makes this difficult, maybe impossible. I know there is prejudice, taboo, all manner of problems, but I cannot help what I feel. Yarrick forced himself to hold Gruk's gaze. If you do not feel the same, I understand. We can simply be partners in the farm, friends, and that will be enough. But I wanted you to know. Gruk stood abruptly, and for a moment Yarrick thought he was going to flee. But instead, the orc came around the table and stood before Yarrick's chair. He was so tall that Yarrick had to crane his neck to look up at him. I do not know how to do this, Gruk said, his voice barely above a whisper. I was silent so long, I do not know how to speak what I feel. Then do not speak, Yarrick said. Show me. Gruk bent down slowly, giving Yarrick every chance to pull away. When their lips met, it was gentle, questioning, achingly tender. Gruk's tusks brushed Yarrick's cheeks, a strange sensation but not unpleasant. Yarrick reached up to cup the back of Gruk's head, threading his fingers through the coarse dark hair, and kissed him back with all the longing he had been suppressing for weeks. When they finally parted, both breathing heavily, Jara was grinning at them from her seat at the table. Well, she said cheerfully, that was inevitable. Gruk let out a sound that took Yarrick a moment to recognize as laughter. The orc sank to his knees so he was more level with Yarrick and pressed their foreheads together in that gesture Yarrick now understood was deeply meaningful. I thought I could not be happy again, Gruk said softly. I thought that was lost, but you made me want to try. They rearranged the sleeping arrangements, giving Jara the cabin's small bedroom while Yarrick and Gruk shared the main room. They lay together on Yarrick's bedroll, Gruk's massive form curled protectively around Yarrick's smaller one, and Yarrick felt safer and more content than he had in years. "Is this real?" Gruk whispered into the darkness. "Or will I wake up still in that merchant's house, still silent, still alone?" "It is real," Yarrick promised. "I am real. This is real, and I am not going anywhere." He felt more than heard Gruk's sigh of relief, and then the orc's breathing deepened into sleep. The next weeks were a period of adjustment as they learned to live as a household of three. Jara proved to be every bit as capable as she had claimed, taking over management of their small but growing trade with the settlement. She was charming and sharp, able to negotiate prices that left Yarrick stunned, and their customers somehow still feeling they had gotten a good deal. She was also deeply protective of Gruk, and watchful of Yarrick in a way that made him nervous until he realized she was simply making sure he treated her friend well. Once she seemed satisfied that Yarrick's feelings were genuine, she relaxed and became warmer, teasing them both mercilessly about their tentative new relationship. Gruk was gradually learning to speak again, his voice growing stronger and more confident each day. He was naturally quiet, they all realized, but his silence now was a choice rather than a prison. When he did speak, his words were thoughtful and often wise, observations about the world around them that showed how carefully he had been watching even when he could not participate. His relationship with Yarrick deepened slowly, both of them cautious and amazed by what was building between them. They worked side by side during the day, their partnership in labor extending naturally into partnership in all things. At night, they held each other, exploring this intimacy with a tenderness that felt almost sacred. One evening, perhaps a month after Jara's arrival, a group of orcs appeared at the edge of their property. Yarrick saw them first and felt a bolt of fear, but Gruk placed a calming hand on his arm. "I know them," Gruk said quietly. "They are from the Stonefist clan, neighbors to Ironroot territory." The orcs approached cautiously, hands away from weapons. There were 5 of them, led by a female orc with elaborate braids and a scar across her left eye. She looked at Gruk for a long moment, then performed a gesture with her hand over her heart that he returned. "Gruk of the Ironroot," she said formally. "We heard rumors you survived, and that Princess Jara lives." Jara had emerged from the cabin. "I am here, Keshna. What do you want?" The orc called Keshna glanced around at their farm, at Yarrick standing protectively close to Gruk, at the life they had clearly built here. "Korgan's rule is failing. He is brutal and stupid, and he has led the Ironroot to the edge of destruction. There are those who would see the old ways restored, who remember Chief Targash and his honor." "I will not return," Jara said firmly. "That life is behind me, we know. We are not asking you to come back." Keshna looked at Gruk again. "But we ask that you renounce any claim to Ironroot leadership, so that we may choose a new chief without fear of challenge." "I have no claim," Gruk said. "I was a guardian, not royalty." "By right of bond you could claim," Keshna countered. "The guardian of the true heir has standing." Yarrick did not fully understand the politics at play, but he understood this was important. He squeezed Gruk's hand gently, a silent gesture of support. Gruk drew himself up to his full height. "I, Gruk, once guardian to the Ironroot throne, do formally renounce any claim to leadership of the Ironroot clan. Let them choose their own path. My path lies here." He looked down at Yarrick, and the love in his eyes was unmistakable. "My home is here." Keshna nodded, satisfied. "Then we will take this message back. The Stonefist clan wishes you well, both of you. Perhaps there will be peace between our peoples yet." She glanced at Yarrick, and Gruk's joined hands. "You make an unusual pair." The world is changing, Yarrick said. Perhaps it is time for unusual things. A slight smile crossed Keshna's scarred face. Perhaps it is. She and her companions departed as quietly as they had come. That night, in the privacy of their shared bed, Gruck was quieter than usual. Yarrick propped himself up on one elbow to look down at his lover. "Are you all right? Do you regret renouncing your claim?" "No," Gruck said immediately. "I meant what I said. My home is here with you." He was quiet a moment longer. "But it makes me think about the future, about what we are building." "What do you want to build?" Yarrick asked. Gruck reached up to trace Yarrick's jawline with one gentle finger. "Something permanent, something real. In orc culture, when two people choose to bind their lives together, there is a ceremony, a vow before witnesses. It makes the bond official, recognized." Yarrick's heart was suddenly pounding. "Are you asking me to marry you? Is that what humans call it? Marriage?" Gruck's brow furrowed. "I do not know how these things work between our peoples." "Marriage is when two people pledge to be together for the rest of their lives," Yarrick explained. "It is legal but also emotional. Spiritual, a commitment before whatever gods or powers you believe in." "Yes," Gruck said simply. "That is what I want, with you." Joy surged through Yarrick so powerfully that he felt lightheaded. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed, deep and passionate, and that night they expressed their commitment to each other in the most intimate way possible, learning each other's bodies with a tenderness and wonder that left them both shaking. In the morning they told Jara, who whooped with delight and immediately began planning. "We will need a proper ceremony," she declared. "Something that honors both human and orc traditions. And we will need witnesses, lots of witnesses. We will make this something the settlement remembers." Over the following weeks, preparations were made. Yarrick learned about orc bonding ceremonies from Gruck and Jara while teaching them about human marriage traditions. They decided to blend the best of both, creating something unique to them. Word spread through the settlement, and reactions were mixed. Some settlers were scandalized at the idea of a human and orc wedding. Others were curious or supportive. Elsa was firmly in the supportive camp and volunteered to help organize the celebration feast. On a warm day in late summer, with wildflowers blooming across their fields and the crops standing tall, they held their ceremony. Perhaps 60 people came, a mixture of human settlers and a small group of orcs from the Stonefist clan, including Keshna, who brought formal recognition of the bond from her chief. Yarrick wore his best clothes, simple but clean, and Gruck had embroidered a vest for himself that was stunning in its intricacy and beauty. They stood together before the gathered crowd, Jara officiating as the person who meant most to both of them. "These two have asked us to witness their bonding," Jara said, her voice carrying clearly. "In orc tradition, a bond is sealed with the exchange of vows and the mixing of blood, a symbol that two lives become one. In human tradition, vows are exchanged and rings given. Today, we honor both." Yarrick and Gruck had written their own vows, and Yarrick went first, his voice shaking slightly with emotion. "Gruck, when I first saw you, I saw someone who had been beaten down by the world but remained strong. I saw quiet dignity and hidden depths. As I came to know you, I saw kindness, intelligence, humor, and a capacity for love that humbles me. You have taught me that connection can bridge any divide, that love is not limited by the bodies we inhabit. I promise to stand by you, to honor you, to build our life together with joy and purpose. You are my partner, my love, my home." Gruck's eyes were wet with tears, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Yarrick, you gave me back my voice. You gave me back my life. When I thought I was nothing, less than nothing, you saw a person. You treated me with respect I thought I would never receive from a human. You showed me that trust can be rebuilt, that happiness is possible even after the worst loss. I promise to stand by you, to protect you, to love you with all that I am. You are my heart, my hope, my future." They exchanged rings, simple bands of silver that Yarrick had commissioned from the settlement's blacksmith. Then, following Orc tradition, they each pricked their thumbs and pressed them together, mingling their blood while Jara spoke the old words of bonding in the Orc language. When it was done, when Jara declared them bonded in both human and Orc law, the crowd erupted in cheers. Even those who had been skeptical seemed moved by the sincerity of the ceremony. The celebration that followed was joyous. There was music and dancing, food and drink. Yarrick danced with Jara, then watched with delight as Gruck was pulled into an Orc dance by Keshna and her companions, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large being. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Yarrick and Gruck stood together at the edge of the celebration, watching their neighbors and new friends mingle and laugh. "Did you ever imagine this?" Gruck asked softly. "When you bought me, did you think it would lead here?" Yarrick shook his head. "I had no idea. I just knew I could not leave you there. Everything else." He smiled. "Everything else was a gift, a blessing I did not expect." "The human concept of fate is interesting," Gruck mused. "Orcs believe in chosen paths, that we make our destiny through our choices. You chose to see me as a person. I chose to trust you. Jara chose to attend a gathering when she was tired. All small choices, but they led us here. Then I am grateful for every choice that brought us together." Yarrick leaned his head against Gruck's arm as far as he could reach given their height difference. "I love you. I love you," Gruck replied, and the words, which had been impossible for him not so long ago, now came easily. As autumn arrived and they harvested their crops, their household settled into a comfortable rhythm. Jara proved to have a talent for brewing, and she began experimenting with ales and meads that soon became popular in the settlement. She also began spending time with one of Elsa's sons, a quiet man named Marcus who shared her love of trading and negotiation. Yarrick and Gruck watched this new potential romance with amused interest. "Should we meddle?" Gruck asked one evening, watching Jara and Marcus talking by the fence line. "Absolutely not," Yarrick said firmly. "Let them figure it out." Their farm was thriving. The crops had been plentiful, and they had earned enough to start planning expansions for the following year. Gruck wanted to build a proper workshop where he could pursue his embroidery and perhaps teach the craft to others. Yarrick was considering acquiring a few sheep, thinking wool production might be profitable. But more than the material success, it was the emotional richness of their life that filled Yarrick with satisfaction. He woke each morning next to the person he loved. He spent his days in productive labor alongside his partner. He shared meals and stories with people who had become family not through blood, but through choice. One crisp morning in late autumn, as frost sparkled on the ground, Yarrick found Gruck standing at the edge of their property, looking out toward the forest where Orc lands began. "Do you miss it?" Yarrick asked, coming to stand beside him. "Your people, your culture." Gruck was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. I miss the songs, the stories, the sense of belonging to something larger than myself." He turned to look at Yarrick. "But I do not miss feeling like I had to constantly prove my worth. I do not miss the violence and the rigid hierarchies. Here I am just Gruck, not a guardian, not a servant, not a symbol of anything, just myself." "You are more than enough," Yarrick said softly, "as are you." Gruck smiled, that still rare expression that lit up his entire face. "I have been thinking about the future, about family." Yarrick felt a flutter in his chest. "What about family? There are Orc children orphaned by the wars, human children too." Jara has mentioned that some orphanages in the eastern provinces would be happy to place children with responsible families. Gruk looked almost shy. I was thinking, perhaps someday, we could provide a home for a child who needs one. The idea took Yarek's breath away. He had not thought much about children, had assumed that was not a possibility for them. But of course it was. They had a home, resources, love to give. I think that is a wonderful idea, Yarek said. Not right away, perhaps, but someday, when we are ready. Gruk pulled him close, and they stood together in the cool morning air, planning dreams and futures. Winter came, and with it a slower pace of life. They spent more time indoors, working on projects and repairs. Gruk taught Yarek some of the embroidery techniques, and though Yarek's fingers were clumsy compared to Gruk's skilled hands, he found the meditative quality of the work soothing. Yarek, in turn, taught Gruk to read and write in the human script, something the orc had never learned. Jara and Marcus became officially engaged in Midwinter, to no one's surprise. They planned to marry in the spring and build a house on the property adjacent to Yarek and Gruk's farm. Elsa was delighted to have her son settling so close, and she had become a regular visitor to their household, often staying for meals and conversation. One evening, as snow fell softly outside and their fire crackled warmly, the four of them sat together, Yarek and Gruk, Jara and Marcus, talking and laughing. "This is happiness," Jara said suddenly, her voice soft. "This is what I was searching for all those years. Not a throne, not power. Just this, people who care about each other, sharing life together. You were always wise," Gruk told her, "even as a child." "I was stubborn as a child," Jara corrected with a laugh. "Remember when I insisted I could climb the sacred tree and got stuck halfway up? You had to coax me down for hours." "You were terrified," Gruk agreed, smiling at the memory. "But you would not cry. Too proud." They traded stories of their childhood in the Ironroot clan, and Yarek and Marcus listened with fascination. It was a glimpse into a world very different from their own, but the emotions were universal. Love, fear, joy, loss. As winter slowly gave way to early spring, Yarek noticed that Gruk seemed distracted, often disappearing into his workshop for long hours. When Yarek asked what he was working on, Gruk would simply smile mysteriously and say it was a surprise. The surprise was revealed on the anniversary of their bonding ceremony. Gruk presented Yarek with a tapestry he had been working on all winter. It was large, perhaps 4 feet across, and depicted their farm in stunning detail. Every building, every tree, even the chickens in their coop were rendered with loving accuracy. But what made Yarek's throat tight with emotion was the 2 figures standing together in the center, a human and an orc, hand in hand, facing the future together. "It is us," Yarek said unnecessarily, his vision blurring with tears. "It is beautiful. You are so talented." "I wanted to capture this," Gruk said softly. "This moment in our lives, so we never forget how far we have come, how much we have built together." They hung the tapestry in their main room, where it became a focal point of the cabin and a conversation piece when visitors came. More than once, Yarek caught Gruk standing before it, a small smile on his face, and knew his partner was feeling the same wonder he felt, that this life was real, was theirs. Spring planting came around again, their second season together, and this time they expanded their fields significantly. Marcus and Jara were married in a ceremony that blended their different backgrounds, and their new house was completed with help from much of the settlement. The community was growing and evolving, becoming a place where different peoples could coexist and even thrive together. Yarek was 30 years old now, and sometimes he thought back to his younger self, the soldier who had been so certain that violence was the only answer, that orcs were enemies to be feared and fought. He had been so wrong, and he was grateful every day for the experiences that had changed his mind and opened his heart. One warm evening in late spring, Yarrick and Gruck took a walk through their land, admiring the new growth, discussing plans for a new barn they wanted to build. They ended up at the stream that ran through their property, sitting on the bank and watching the water flow past. "I have something to tell you," Gruck said, and his tone made Yarrick look at him sharply. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, but I received a message from Jara today. She has been in contact with an orphanage in the eastern provinces. There is a child, a half-orc boy about 6 years old. His mother was human, his father orc. The father died in the wars, the mother died in childbirth of a second child who did not survive. He has been in the orphanage for 2 years and they are having difficulty placing him because of his mixed heritage." Yarrick's heart was pounding. "And you want to offer him a home?" "I want us to offer him a home," Gruck corrected. "If you agree, I know we said we would wait, but this child, he needs a family, and we have so much to offer." Yarrick thought about their comfortable cabin, their thriving farm, the community of friends and neighbors who had become family. He thought about the love that filled their home, love that could easily expand to include a child who needed it. "Yes," he said, "let us bring him home." The process took several weeks of correspondence and legal paperwork. The orphanage was initially skeptical about placing a child with an interspecies couple, but Jara's contacts and persuasive letters eventually convinced them. They sent references from neighbors, testimonials from the settlement council, even a letter from Keshna of the Stonefist clan attesting to Gruck's character. Finally, in midsummer, Yarrick and Gruck made the journey to the eastern provinces to meet the child and, if all went well, bring him home. The orphanage was a large stone building in a market town, clean but impersonal. They were led to a courtyard where several children were playing. The matron pointed out a small boy sitting alone under a tree, watching the other children but not joining them. He was small for 6, with skin that was a muted green-gray color, somewhere between human and full orc. His ears were slightly pointed, and when he looked up as they approached, Yarrick could see he had small tusks, smaller than a full orc's but present. His eyes were large and dark and full of wariness. "This is Torin," the matron said. "Torin, these men have come to meet you." Gruck knelt down so he was at the boy's level. "Hello, Torin. My name is Gruck. This is Yarrick. We have a farm in the western frontier. We heard you might like to come live with us." Torin looked between them, his expression guarded. "You are orc," he said to Gruck. "And you are human," he said to Yarrick. "Why would you want me? No one wants half-orcs." The matter-of-fact way he said it broke Yarrick's heart. He knelt beside Gruck. "We want you because we believe everyone deserves a family and a home. We have plenty of room, and we could use someone to help feed the chickens and tend the garden. But mostly, we want you because we think you could be happy with us, and we could be happy with you." "What if the other kids are mean to me?" Torin asked. "They always are." "Some might be," Gruck said honestly. "People can be unkind about things they do not understand, but you will have us and you will have friends. There are good people in our community who will accept you." Torin was quiet, thinking. Then, "Do you have chickens?" "Really?" Yarrick smiled. "We do, 10 of them. They are very spoiled and have a beautiful coop that Gruck built." "I like chickens," Torin said softly. "They are nice." They spent the afternoon with Torin, showing him the toys and clothes they had brought, talking about the farm and what his life there might be like. The boy gradually relaxed, even smiled a few times. When it was time for them to leave for the inn where they were staying, Torin looked disappointed. "Will you come back tomorrow?" he asked. "We will," Yarrick promised. "And if you decide you want to come home with us, we will take care of all the arrangements." That night at the inn, Gruck was quiet and Yarrick knew he was thinking about the boy. He reminds me of myself, Gruck said finally. That wariness, that expectation of rejection, I do not want him to feel that way anymore. Then we will bring him home, Yarrick said simply, and we will love him until he believes he is worthy of being loved. The next day they asked Torin directly if he wanted to come live with them. The boy looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, please. The paperwork was completed, and 3 days later they left the orphanage with Torin sitting on the horse between Yarrick and Gruck, his small bag of possessions clutched in his lap. He was quiet for most of the journey, but Yarrick noticed he often leaned back against Gruck, as though seeking the comfort of physical closeness. When they arrived at the farm, Jara was waiting with a meal prepared, and Marcus had helped set up a small bed in the cabin's bedroom for Torin. The boy looked around with wide eyes, taking in everything. "Those are your chickens," he asked, pointing to the coop. "Those are our chickens," Gruck corrected. "Yours too now. Would you like to meet them?" Torin nodded eagerly, and they spent the evening introducing him to the farm, to the animals, to the rhythm of their life. That night, when Yarrick tucked him into bed, Torin looked up at him with those large, solemn eyes. "Is this real?" he asked. "Or will I wake up back at the orphanage?" Yarrick's heart ached. "It is real, you are home, and we are not going anywhere." Torin reached out and took Yarrick's hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "The first weeks were an adjustment." Torin was tentatively well-behaved but clearly waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to decide he was too much trouble and send him back. Gradually, as no such thing happened, he began to relax. He had nightmares sometimes, and they took turns sitting with him until he fell back asleep. He was behind in his education, so Yarrick began teaching him letters and numbers in the evenings, but mostly they just lived together, establishing routines and rituals. Torin took his chicken feeding duties very seriously. He helped in the garden, learning to identify plants and pull weeds. He followed Gruck around like a shadow, watching the orc work and asking endless questions. The settlement's reaction to Torin was mixed. Some children were curious and friendly. Others were cruel, calling him names or refusing to play with him. Yarrick had to resist the urge to intervene every time, knowing Torin needed to learn to navigate these challenges himself. But when a particular group of boys pushed Torin down and called him a monster, it was Gruck who appeared, his massive form suddenly looming over them. "That is my son you are speaking to," Gruck said, his voice quiet but dangerous. "You will show him respect or you will answer to me." The boys fled, and Torin looked up at Gruck with awe. "Your son?" he asked. "Really?" Gruck knelt down and brushed dirt from Torin's clothes. "Yes, really. You are our son, Yarrick's and mine, if you want to be." Torin threw his arms around Gruck's neck and held on tight, and Yarrick, watching from a short distance away, had to wipe tears from his own eyes. As summer turned to autumn, Torin blossomed. He grew more confident, made friends with a few of the braver children in the settlement. His nightmares became less frequent. He laughed more, a bright, joyful sound that filled their cabin with warmth. He began calling them Papa Gruck and Papa Yarrick without prompting, and every time Yarrick heard it, he felt his heart swell with love. One evening, as they sat around the table for dinner, Torin announced he had drawn a picture at lessons that day. He showed it to them proudly. A cabin with 3 figures outside, one large and green, one medium-sized and one small. Above it, in careful letters, he had written, "My family." Gruck and Yarrick looked at each other across the table, and Yarrick saw his own emotions reflected in his husband's amber eyes. Pride, love, wonder at how their lives had unfolded. "It is perfect," Yarrick said, his voice thick. "We will hang it right next to Papa Gruck's tapestry." That night, after Torin was asleep, Yarrick and Gruck sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Do you ever think about where we might have been if things had gone differently?" Yarrick asked. "If I had not gone to that merchant lord's estate, if I had not seen you there." "Sometimes," Gruck admitted. "I think I would still be there, silent and bowing, not really living, or perhaps I would have died. There were days when that seemed preferable." Yarrick tightened his arm around Gruck's waist. "I am so glad things worked out the way they did. I am glad I saw you, glad I could not walk away." "I am glad you gave me my voice back," Gruck said. "In every way that matters. And now—" He gestured to the cabin behind them where their son slept safely. "Now we have this, a family, a real home." "We have everything," Yarrick agreed softly. The seasons continued their cycle. Winter came again, and they spent cozy evenings indoors, Gruck teaching Torin embroidery while Yarrick read aloud from books. Spring returned, and Torin helped plant the fields, his small hands learning the feel of soil and seed. Summer brought warmth and growth, and Torin grew too, shooting up several inches and growing stronger. By the time Torin had been with them for a year, he had fully integrated into their family and the community. He had friends, both human and a few young orcs from the Stonefist clan who sometimes visited for trade. He was doing well in his lessons, showing a particular talent for drawing and mathematics. He was happy, and that happiness radiated outward, touching everyone around him. One day, as Torin played with other children near the stream, Yarrick and Gruck worked together in the workshop, building furniture for Marcus and Jara, whose family would soon be expanding with a baby on the way. "I have been thinking," Gruck said as he carefully fitted a joint together, "about expanding the house, adding another room in case we take in another child," Yarrick finished, smiling. "I have been thinking the same thing. There are so many children who need homes." "Torin has been asking if he could have a brother or sister," Gruck said. "He likes the idea of not being the only child." "Then let us build the room," Yarrick said, "and let Jara know we are open to hearing about other children who need families." Over the next year, they did exactly that. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 new bedrooms. And when Jara brought word of twin girls, half-orc like Torin, who had been orphaned when their village was destroyed by bandits, Yarrick and Gruck did not hesitate. They brought the girls, Lara and Mira, home. The twins were 4 years old, energetic and initially quite wild, having spent months surviving on the road before being found and brought to the orphanage. They required patience and consistency, but gradually they settled down, learning they were safe, that food would always be available, that the large green man and the kind human man would not abandon them. Torin was an excellent big brother, patient with his new sisters and proud of his role. The cabin rang with children's laughter, and Yarrick often found himself pausing in his work just to listen to it, marveling at how full his life had become. Years passed. The children grew. Torin became a thoughtful young man, eventually apprenticing with the settlement's carpenter, showing talent for fine woodwork. The twins developed distinct personalities, Lara bold and adventurous, Mira quieter and scholarly. All 3 children knew they were loved, knew they belonged, and grew up confident in their place in the world despite their mixed heritage. The settlement itself changed too, becoming known as a place where humans and orcs could live in peace. More interspecies families formed. Trade with the orc clans increased. The young people of the settlement, who had grown up with orc neighbors and mixed heritage friends, saw nothing strange in it. The world was changing, slowly but surely. Yarrick's hair began to gray at the temples. Gruck developed a few more scars from the inevitable accidents of farm life. They grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year, tempered and strengthened by shared joys and shared challenges. One evening, when Torin was 17, Lara and Mira were 12, and the house was full of noise and activity as the girls argued about something and Torin refereed, Yarrick and Gruck escaped to the porch for a moment of peace. "You remember when it was just us?" Yarrick asked, leaning against Gruck's solid form. "When the cabin was quiet, I do," Gruck said, "but I do not miss it. This is better, fuller, richer." "Definitely noisier," Yarrick said with a laugh. "That too." Gruck pressed a kiss to the top of Yarrick's head. "But I would not change anything. Every moment of our life together has been a gift. Even the hard times," Yarrick asked. "The nightmares, the challenges with the children, the neighbors who still look at us with suspicion, even those," Gruck confirmed, "because we faced them together. Because we built something real through all of it." Yarrick tilted his head back to look up at his husband. "I love you. After all these years, after everything, I love you more now than I did on our bonding day." "And I love you," Gruck said, "more than words can express. You saw me when I was invisible. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me a family." His voice grew rough with emotion. "You gave me everything." They stood together in the gathering twilight, two men who had defied expectations and overcome prejudice to build a life of profound meaning. Behind them, their children's voices called out that dinner was ready. Ahead of them, the fields they had planted together stretched out toward the forest, toward the future. They had started as human and orc, separated by history and prejudice. They had become partners, then husbands, then fathers. They had built not just a farm but a community, not just a house but a home. And through it all, they had held onto the truth that had brought them together, that every person, regardless of their skin or their heritage, deserves to be seen, to be valued, to be loved. As they turned to go inside, to join their children for the meal that Torin had prepared with Lara's enthusiastic if chaotic help, Yarrick felt a sense of completeness that took his breath away. This was what he had been searching for all his life without knowing it. Not glory or honor, not wealth or status, but this: connection, family, love. Gruck held the door for him, and Yarrick stepped through into the warm, bright cabin full of voices and laughter, into the life they had built together, and knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. They all were. And whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. This unlikely family bound by love and choice, proof that walls can be broken down, that prejudice can be overcome, that the heart knows no boundaries when it comes to those it claims as home. The evening passed in the comfortable chaos of family life. Dinner was eaten with much talk and laughter. Stories were shared about the day's events. Plans were made for tomorrow's tasks. And when the children were finally settled for the night, when the cabin grew quiet and Yarrick and Gruck retired to their own room, they held each other close. Two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life that honored them both. "Thank you," Gruck whispered into the darkness, "for seeing me, for saving me." "Thank you," Yarrick whispered back, "for letting me, for trusting me, for building this life with me." "Always," Gruck promised, "for always." And in the peaceful dark of their home, surrounded by the quiet breathing of their sleeping children, they rested, secure in the knowledge that their love had created something that would ripple outward, touching lives beyond their own, proving to the world that peace and understanding were possible, that different peoples could not just coexist but thrive together. Their story, which had begun with a silent servant bowing to everyone and speaking to no one, had become a story of love triumphant, of family forged not through blood but through choice, of a future built on hope and courage, and the simple but profound truth that every person deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be loved for exactly who they are. And so they lived, not in some distant fantasy of perfection, but in the real, messy, beautiful complexity of daily life, facing each challenge and celebrating each joy together. A testament to what can be achieved when prejudice is set aside and hearts are opened, when courage meets compassion and two lonely souls find each other across the divides that society tries to build between them. Their children would grow and have their own adventures, their own challenges, their own triumphs. They would carry forward the lessons learned in this house. That love transcends superficial differences, that family is what you make it, that the world can change if people are willing to do the hard work of understanding and acceptance. And they would tell the story of how their fathers met, how an orc servant who bowed to everyone and spoke to no one found his voice through the love of a human man who refused to walk away from injustice, and how that chance encounter bloomed into something extraordinary. But that was the future. For now, in this moment, in this home, Yarrick and Gruck simply held each other and felt grateful, deeply and profoundly grateful, for every choice and chance and moment that had led them here, to this perfect, imperfect life they had built together, one day at a time, one act of courage at a time, one choice to love at a time. And outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, looking down on a small farm in the frontier where two men slept peacefully, surrounded by the family they had created, living proof that love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in the world, capable of healing wounds, bridging divides, and transforming lives in ways both small and profound. Their story was complete, their happiness earned, their love eternal, and their legacy secure in the lives they had touched and the world they had helped to change. One kind act, one brave choice, one moment of seeing another person's humanity at a time. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply treasured, a beacon of hope in a world that sometimes forgot that different did not mean lesser, that barriers were meant to be broken, and that every person, orc or human or anything in between, deserved the chance to be seen, to be valued, to belong. And in being seen, in being valued, in finally belonging, Gruck had not just found his voice, he had found his purpose, his joy, his reason for living. As had Yarrick. As had all of them, this patchwork family stitched together with love and determination. The end had become a beginning, and the beginning had led to this. A life worth living, a love worth fighting for, a family worth everything. And in the grand tapestry of their world, this small story of connection and courage added its threads, contributing to a larger pattern of change and hope, proving that one person seeing another person's worth could start a revolution of kindness. One silent orc finding his voice could inspire others to speak their truths, and one choice to love across boundaries could light the way for countless others to follow. They had bowed to no one in the end, these two, except to each other in mutual respect and love. They had spoken to everyone who would listen, sharing their story and their hope. And they had noticed, truly noticed, not just a crown scar on a wrist, but the humanity and worth in every person they met, regardless of whether they had green skin or pale tusks or smooth jaws, pointed ears or rounded ones. And in that noticing, in that seeing, they had changed not just their own lives but the world around them, one day, one moment, one act of love at a time.